to interview Tanni Thompson, Baroness and also a Paralympian athlete. Baroness Gray Thompson has actually kindly agreed to talk to us and answer a few questions on the Paralympics and also Trailblazers related issues. Hello.
Hello, hi.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be interviewed today.
Pleasure.
Growing up as a young disabled person can definitely be really frustrating. I, for example, found quite a challenge going into things like leisure facilities, getting into cinemas and bars and restaurants and things. What were challenges when you were growing up and what were the frustrations you found?
Well, there were huge challenges when I was growing up because I didn't really see other disabled people. So I'm 42, so back when I became a wheelchair user when I was 7, there just weren't disabled people about. They were locked away in special schools, similar children to myself, or, a lot were kind of not in work, so you just didn't see people around. So I guess the same sort of things really. I mean, I remember trying to go to the cinema with friends when I was 9, and the manager of the cinema not allowing me in because it was a fire risk. And my mum had taught me to say, because we got that a lot, we got that from shops, restaurants, loads of places. My mum taught me to say, well, I've never spontaneously combusted before, so I'm not going to do it today. And they kind of look and panic. And I just remember it being kind of just quite hard, because the other thing, there were no accessible toilets anywhere, like none. So I grew up in Cardiff, and all public toilets were downstairs, and it was also before lots of shops had toilets, and they certainly didn't have things like baby changing. So if I wanted to go out with my friends, I had to either kind of just not drink anything for the 5 hours before I went, so I didn't have to use the loo, or I had to kind of base the time that I was out and away from home on where there were any toilets around. So I remember when the first accessible toilets were built in Cardiff, and being so excited, really, really excited, because it meant I could stay out with my friends all day. And it's things like that, again, there were no drop curbs, and people used to stare at me in the street, and people used to, say in the supermarket, drag their kids out my way in case I caught, or they caught something. So it's all those sorts of things that you kind of realise it's loads better than it was, but those things still exist. They're not completely gone.
Definitely, and actually, as you say, things are slowly improving, and I myself think that sometimes access and public awareness is slowly improving, but what do you think has contributed to this, and how do you feel things have changed for disabled people in recent years, because your experiences seem so sort of, so surprising in a way, in terms of, being able to go down the street and people actually being worried about catching things.
Yeah, well, I think legislation's helped, and there's sort of a group of disabled people who, many of them are now in the House of Lords, who literally chained themselves to the railings outside this building to make sure there was change. So I think, there's been a significant group of disabled people who've campaigned for difference. I think things like the Paralympics have helped in a certain way, because it shows a different view of disabled people. I don't think it shows a very realistic view all the time of disabled people, because it shows the athletes who at that level don't really experience much discrimination, but I think that's it's helped open people's eyes to what disabled people can do. And I just think also, you look at sort of other forms of legislation sort of around women, or kind of race relations and those things that have gradually helped sort of nudge it. Where I think we're not, we're probably behind other groups, is that people still don't understand what to call us. And I think the language is a real problem. So I still hear people say, lots of dreadful words which I probably shouldn't say on camera, but they don't understand where around race or women. They know that there's certain things they can't say, where I think within disabled people that's a massive challenge. So I think we've still got loads to do, and there's still lots of challenges out there to make sure that disabled people don't get treated badly. And I think even now, if you've grown up with an impairment, I still see young disabled people who are so used to experience discrimination, just very low levels, but they think that's actually normal, and I get really angry because I kind of go, no, you. That you are being discriminated against, but it's I think part of it's empowering disabled people for themselves to say, do you know what, I'm not going to take it. And I have different days where if somebody pats me on the head, some days I'll just go, do you know what, breathe and walk away, and then other days I might say something, but because you just have to kind of not learn to accept it, but you kind of have to learn to deal with it.
Definitely, and I think a lot of trailblazers probably can see that they've had experiences like that as well, and knowing that there are still some days and some not so good days. But as your career as an athlete is taking to many Olympic Games across the world, Do you think that London is going to be the most inclusive games yet? And what do you think will be different for disabled people, both as competitors and supporters, from previous games?
I think the games were going to be amazing, will be incredible, because there's one organising committee that's looking after both games. So in terms of the venues, they've looked at it from Olympic perspective, then Paralympic perspective, and then also sort of looking a bit beyond into legacy and then back again. So I think the accessibility is going to be really good. The organising committee, you know, just in terms of who they employ, and by games time it'll be, you know, into several thousand people. They've worked really hard to try and make sure that the workforce is diverse, you know, across kind of every you know, group possible. So, you know, there are people working there from, you know, being 16 to being in their late 60s. And I think that's really important that you see, you know, for me, I see lots of disabled people around the building, which I think that kind of helps, because at the end of the games, all those people will go and work somewhere else. And also what they've done is they've worked really hard in the volunteering programme to make sure that disabled people, not just, you know, signed up to be a volunteer, but through the interview process, that the appropriate provision was in place. So they weren't treated differently. There wasn't, if you're a disabled person who wants to volunteer for the games, you know, we'll siphon you off somewhere else. They've actually made that really inclusive, and the fact, you know, they're going to need 70,000 volunteers for the games, who will be exposed to disabled people will be exposed to non-disabled people, you know, that will change things. And my kind of wish for the volunteering side was that, you know, at games time, when you're at Olympic Park, you see disabled people wearing the volunteers top, and that's something that, you know, I hope we're going to do. So it's going to have a big impact. There's massive challenges, you know, transport in London, really difficult, and it's going to be really busy. Yeah. But also games time, you know, there's lots of stuff going on to try and make sure that we can kind of move people around in the right way.
The short term and long term as well, I guess. Some of the improvements in London are sort of long term as well for the legacy as well, so that's really good news. Some media reports say that ticket sales for the Paralympics are going really well, I think. And are you surprised by this? And what do you think the Olympics and Paralympic Games organisers have got right because of this whole inclusion and the promotion in the UK and within London specifically, as opposed to maybe some of the other games you may have been to?
Well, I'm really excited ticket sales have gone so well, and for both games, you know, there's been unprecedented demand. It's been absolutely huge. I think what they've got right with the Paralympics is selling the tickets. So at previous games, you know, you could buy tickets, but in the end a lot of tickets were given away. And I don't think that always encourages people to come. So, you know, the tickets are, you know, very competitively priced. So I think that encourages people. So you're not talking, you know, thousands of pounds for a ticket. You know, most tickets are around sort of the £10 mark. So, you know, that makes it affordable for an awful lot of people. And I think it's quite exciting because, you know, it means that people want to come and watch. And ultimately, I don't really care if people apply for Paralympic tickets because they didn't get Olympic tickets, or, you know, they just want to come and look at the venues, or they're passionate about disability sport. You know, people are going to come, and I think, I mean, it's great for the athletes. You know, I've competed at events where there's been 65,000 people in the stadium, and I've been there where I can pretty much name the crowd. You know, we go, oh, that's such and such a mum, and that's my sister, and that's my dad, and that's my husband, and that's not really a very pleasant place to be as an athlete. So, you know, we want loads of people to come and watch, and there's going to be other opportunities to buy Paralympic tickets. And what I also know they're going to do is, you know, there will be opportunities for school children to come to both games, because I think that'll be really good, because if you can open young people's mind, you know, non-disabled people's mind to sort of disability, and again, you see disabled volunteers and you see all that, it just gets people thinking a little bit differently about things.
And maybe changing perceptions and the exposure of disability, and as you say, with regard to volunteers as well, something that may not be usual, you may not expect that in the games, so that's great. And what advice would you give organisations or establishments when they want to promote inclusion of disabled people? Because, I mean, it seems that the games are getting it well, they're doing well with it.
I think with inclusion, it doesn't have to be that complicated, and it doesn't have to be expensive. I think, you know, there's a view that, you know, to include everyone is really difficult, and actually, you know, any business, it's just about good business practice. You know, actually disabled people, you know, have, you know, if you add us all up together, you know, there's huge disposable income there. You know, for me, I shop and I go places that I know are accessible, or where people are really nice. So, you know, there's one shop I go to quite close to where I live, which is not terribly accessible, but the staff are amazing. you know, and I choose to spend my money in certain places, and you know, it makes good business sense to everyone, so to make it as accessible as possible. And it's just the right thing to do. You know, I get really frustrated when you see, you know, maybe a cafe that's got 2 steps that could quite easily, and for not an awful lot of money, have a ramp in, and go, oh, it's really hard. And you go, do you know what? No, it's not. But ultimately, my view is if you don't want money, don't have it. You know, just that's fine. But we still have to keep pushing, and maybe it's a time for stronger legislation to make stuff happen. You know, it worked very effectively in the States, where literally overnight, every, you know, shop and business had to be wheelchair accessible, and you know, I think we could probably do with a little bit more of that.
Definitely, because I think sometimes we find that the legislation may exist, but there's nothing to enforce it in some ways as well. But as you said, sometimes disabled people have got quite a large disposable income. How accessible do you think London is for socialising, and what do you think can be done to improve access again in the city? So with regard to the ramps and things like that, maybe when they're newly refurbished.
Yeah, London's really tough because it's such an old city, and you know, it's hard to change every bit of it. But actually, I don't think that should stop us trying. And I think it's really important that, you know, as our capital city, it becomes more accessible. And there's lots of work going on, whether it's through a few of the underground stations that will now have lift access because of the games, or whether it's part of the river walkway that's improving. Ultimately, the big stuff like that costs loads of money. The small stuff, putting a ramp into a cafe, doesn't cost much at all. And you know, I think that, you know, we just should keep doing it. I mean, I tend to, especially with my husband and my daughter, I just tend to go places that are not accessible. If I want to go in, because you can kind of hike me up a couple of steps, or we kind of grab a couple of people in the street, and do it that way. I mean, that's not for everybody.
Definitely, and I think, sorry to interrupt, with regard to attitudes, as you said, there are some places where it's staff that are really helpful as well.
I mean, I was in a restaurant quite recently near Piccadilly with my husband and daughter, and you know, it was all fine, I could get in and that was lovely, and I wanted to use the toilet, and women's toilet was upstairs. And I was like, great. So, because I want to go now, I don't want to go in 2 hours' time. So I ended up sending my daughter upstairs to see where the toilet was, and it was actually quite close to the stairs. And so I crawled up the stairs because I could do it, and I was wearing kind of an old pair of jeans, and that was fine. And you know, it was that kind of balance, like I need to go now. And you know, my daughter was great because she's sort of grown up around it, so she might have said in quite loud voices as I was crawling up the stairs, you know, are they evil, mummy, because they don't have a downstairs toilet? And it's like, not evil, darling, they just don't understand. So she's very good at that. But actually 6 American tourists who were in the restaurant walked out because, and I thought originally because I was crawling up the stairs, but it was because there was no accessible toilet, and they felt that that was not acceptable. And that was the biggest thing for the manager of the restaurant, who was panicking because he'd lost 6 covers, you know, and that was quite good.
Definitely, and also because it actually raises awareness to maybe the non-disabled people and realise that there's actually revenue that could be lost in that way. It's a financial argument.
Yeah.
Would you describe the United Kingdom as a good place to live? And do you think, as a disabled person, there's a particular town or city that you think is particularly good or particularly bad as a wheelchair user?
I think the UK is generally a really good place to live if you're disabled. I might have travelled lots around the world, and it actually makes you appreciate that however much we moan and groan about things, do not, it's not that bad. Although there's still lots of things I'm worried about. You know, I've sort of been to countries where, you know, disabled women and even now are ostracised from society, and you know, grow up in orphanages and just aren't allowed to marry, aren't allowed to work, and that's you know, as a woman who's disabled, I find that's quite scary. So that makes me realise how lucky I am, and the fact, you know, we still have National Health Service and we still have, you know, welfare. Although there's going to be lots of changes in that in the next few months, it's not too bad. And for a good or a bad place to live, that's really hard because everywhere's kind of different. I think I grew up in Cardiff, and that's gone through major changes. You know, I think that's like a pretty good place. I think I live quite close to Middlesbrough. That's pretty good for a disabled person. The places that I think I would never live, and I know this is all, but kind of York, but it's really old, and there are loads of cobbles, and there's loads of, you know, planning reasons why you're not allowed to just slap a big pile of tarmac down on cobbles. So things like that. So again, I'm quite fortunate. I choose to live somewhere that's quite accessible and quite flat, and there's shops around, and but that's not easy for an awful lot of people to do. But you know, I think, you know, history and culture's pretty important, but I think there's also sensitive things that we can do to adapt things in a different way, where I don't think that we always think enough about making a sensitive adaptation. My dad was an architect, so I kind of grew up knowing about kind of planning and buildings, and actually one of my birthday presents, he gave me part M of the building regs for about a bit of a sad birthday present. But you know, I think there's lots of things we can do that we don't have to get caught up in history. We don't have to destroy what's gone before, but we can add to it in a sensitive way.
Definitely, and I think even as a Trailblazers, when we were working on the cinema campaign, some of the architects actually said it's sometimes about thinking creatively. So even if things are listed buildings, there's still a way of maybe finding another way around it.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Trailblazers and our network and what we do?
I think it's really positive because it's about encouraging disabled people to kind of have a voice. And I think what's really useful as a disabled person is to meet other people, maybe not with the same impairment, but who've been through things and find different ways to cope and different ways to do things. And I think that's where you get stronger. The more people that you have around you that have dealt with it, that you become better at dealing with things yourself. So I think it's that kind of support is really important. And from sort of a campaigning point of view, you know, you just have to keep going. You know, things won't get better unless disabled people speak out. And I get really frustrated when, you know, it's not disabled people speaking for themselves. You know, and that's where I think a lot of the voice has to come from, because they're the people with the experience. And there's loads of ways of making change happen, but ultimately I think it has to come from disabled people. You know, and I think, you know, in the next couple of years there's loads of challenges because the economic climate and, you know, lots of things that are happening. But we need kind of that really strong voice.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. How long is that? I can talk forever.